You're about to unlock something most women will never know, not because it's hard to understand, but because it's too brutal to accept. It's the one truth that makes a man go all in or disappear forever. It's the one quality that once he senses it in you, makes him realize there's no upgrade, no replacement, no second option. But here's the catch. This thing he's drawn to, it can't be faked, and if you try to perform it, he'll sniff it out like blood in the water. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to become the woman he never lets go of without saying a word. You probably think it's about your looks. It's not. Looks are currency, but they're the kind that inflates fast, the kind that loses value the moment a younger, shinier version walks by. And if you've ever caught a man staring just a little too long at another woman while his hand is still on your back, you know this already. Beauty makes a man curious, but it doesn't anchor him. What anchors him, what claims his loyalty from the inside out, is your energy. Not your bubbly charm, not your ability to match his vibe, not how much you bend for his needs or anticipate his moods. It's something colder, stronger, something that smells like sovereignty. Let me explain. Most women operate on what I call approval addiction. You dress for it. You walk for it. You even shrink your voice when it threatens to get too loud in the room. You confuse politeness for femininity and compromise for connection. But there's a reason why the women who get ghosted the most are the ones who are the most accommodating. Men don't obsess over convenience, they obsess over consequences. Specifically the silent kind. You want to know what makes a man stay up at night, scrolling through old messages and trying to decode the last thing you said. It's when he realizes you don't need him, but you chose him anyway. Let that sink in. Because that's the core of the secret. You see, every man carries a fear he can't speak out loud, a primal, unconscious terror that the woman in front of him might see through him, that she might not just fall for the role he plays, but spot the parts of him that even he hasn't faced. The cracks, the cowardice, the spaces where his strength is borrowed, not built. And when a woman walks into his life who isn't impressed by the mask, who doesn't flinch at the silence, who doesn't beg for validation, she terrifies him, but she also haunts him. She becomes the woman he compares everyone else to. Because you weren't chasing love, you were love. You weren't competing for attention, you were the moment. You weren't seducing him, you were deciding. Let me tell you a story. Years ago I met a woman in Lisbon. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flirty, but she had this stillness around her that made every room bend around her center. We sat across from each other in a smoky rooftop bar, and I remember thinking, she's not here to be chosen, she's here to see if you're worth her time. That was the entire power shift. She wasn't cold, she laughed at the right moments. Her voice was soft, deliberate, but under it all was this terrifying calm, like she had nothing to prove, like she wasn't auditioning for anyone's future. And every man in the room felt it. You could see it, men leaning just a little closer, offering to buy her a drink, to light her cigarette, to know what she did for work. She didn't bite, she smiled. She nodded, but the moment she felt them trying to perform, she leaned back, not rudely, quietly, and it killed them. You know why? Because her attention was expensive. She didn't say it, she didn't wear it like armor, but every move whispered the truth. You don't get more of me just because you want it, and that right there, that's the trait he never lets go of. It's not about being hard to get. That's childish, performative, a tactic used by women who still secretly crave being chased more than being respected. That's not power, that's bait. True power is this. You don't need him to pursue you, you don't need him to see your worth. You already know it, And the second he senses that, really senses it, not because you posted a thirst trap with a healing era caption, but because he feels the weight of your absence, he's screwed. Because now, he has to ask himself a question that ruins most men. What does she see when she looks at me, and why the hell does she still not need me? Want to break a man's ego in half, disappear without slamming the door, just vanish, not to punish him, not to teach him a lesson, just because you realized your time costs too much to spend where it's not being matched. Men can survive being yelled at, they can survive being blocked, they can even survive being replaced. But what they can't recover from is a woman who leaves with grace. Because silence forces reflection, and if there's one thing men are bad at, it's sitting with their own emptiness. They project, they chase, they conquer, but once the conquest is done, they're forced to confront the echo, and if you were the kind of woman who brought depth to his chaos, your silence becomes unbearable. So how do you become her? How do you become the woman he never lets go of? It's not about rules, it's not about playing cool, it's about a complete identity shift. You have to stop trying to become someone desirable, and instead start returning to who you were before the world convinced you to be digestible. The version of you that didn't soften your edges just to make others comfortable, the version that didn't flinch at loneliness, the version that knew solitude wasn't punishment, it was a sacred filter. Men don't commit to women who beg, they commit to women they fear losing access to, not because you're manipulative, but because your energy is rare, and he knows he's not entitled to it. Let's dig even deeper. There's a psychological shift that happens in a man when he realizes he's not the prize. When he looks into your eyes and doesn't see desperation, but discernment, when your questions are piercing, not pleasing, when you don't get giggly at his compliments, but instead raise an eyebrow and ask, what makes you say that? You've flipped the script. Suddenly he's not auditioning you, you're screening him, you're watching his words, his patterns, his presence, not to control him, not to manipulate, but because you value yourself too much to accept scraps wrapped in charm. And now, he has to rise, or he has to go, because mediocrity doesn't survive in the presence of a woman who actually knows her worth. And this is where Freud was right. He believed that attraction is less about logic and more about internal conflict. A man is drawn to the woman who mirrors the part of him he's trying to evolve into, or the part he's never been able to conquer. So when you operate from a place of grounded wholeness, when you carry that dangerous mix of self-trust and detachment, you tap into something ancient in his psyche. He doesn't know why he wants you, he just does. And every woman who tries to compete with you, every woman who throws herself at him hoping to outgive, outlove, outsex you, just makes you more unforgettable, because you weren't available, you weren't convincing, you were sovereign, and sovereignty can't be seduced, it can only be respected. He'll crave your chaos because it's not needy. He'll miss your silence because it wasn't loud. He'll dream of your body because it never begged. You didn't chase him, you didn't threaten to leave, you didn't overshare, you didn't try to make it work. You were the storm, and storms don't apologize. He won't say it out loud, but he knows it. From the moment you stopped asking where it was going, he panicked. He may have smiled, he may have pulled away, he may have even started flirting with other women just to prove to himself he still had options. But deep in his gut, the second he sensed you were no longer waiting on his next move, something primal ignited. And it's not love, not yet. It's fear. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of replacement. Fear that you saw through him and didn't flinch, because when you stopped chasing clarity, you stopped being predictable. And nothing is more intoxicating or more terrifying to a man than a woman he can't read anymore. Let's make one thing painfully clear. A man doesn't obsess over a woman he understands. He obsesses over the mystery he can't solve, and the moment he realizes your emotions are no longer hanging on his attention, that your days are no longer shaped by his texts or his silences, that's when his brain short-circuits. He replays your last message. He scrolls back through photos. He checks your story views, and he lies to himself. I'm just curious. But he's not. He's trying to re-enter a world that no longer revolves around him, because now your silence is louder than his presence ever was, and that's where your power lives. Not in control, but in non-response. You have to understand something about the male ego. It thrives in spaces where it's fed, but it aches in spaces where it's ignored. When you were eager, you were easy to discard. When you were generous, you were easy to delay. But the moment you became unavailable, not because you're punishing him, but because you outgrew the dynamic, he starts spiraling. Because now you're not reacting, you're deciding. And men don't chase women who scream, they chase the ones who disappear into their standards. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine a man standing in the middle of a room. You are a closed door across from him. At first he knocks, you answer immediately. He smiles, comes in, looks around, feels welcome, comfortable. But then one day, he knocks, and you don't answer. He knocks again, louder, still silence. Now he's pacing, checking his reflection, running his hand through his hair, wondering if he wore the right mask, said the wrong thing, missed the right cue, because you changed the rules of access. And now the door is closed, not with anger, not with spite, but with self-respect. And that is what he'll never forget. Here's the brutal truth no one wants to say. A man doesn't value your kindness until he fears your absence. He doesn't respect your love until he realizes you weren't giving it freely. You were offering it to someone you believed deserved it. And once he suspects he no longer does, the game changes. He may act unbothered. He may say things like, "She's doing too much now," or "She's probably talking to someone else." But deep inside, a different story plays. What if I misread her? What if she really is done? What if I was never in control at all? This is where Freud's psychoanalysis sneaks in. Every man has what Freud called an ego ideal, the version of himself he wants to believe he is, strong, desired, chosen. But when you pull away without fanfare, you threaten that identity. You reveal the cracks. You make him feel like he's not the main character in your life anymore. And because he doesn't know how to handle that, he either comes back harder or disappears in denial. Either way, your silence disarms him. Because you didn't fight for him, you didn't chase, you didn't cry, you just stopped trying. And that makes you unforgettable. Let's talk about emotional leverage. Because that's what this is, at its core. When a man senses that you're not seeking his validation, but are instead rooted in your own, he's destabilized. Not because you're playing games, but because most women don't operate this way. Most women pour, most women fix, most women think that if they just do enough, love hard enough, stay long enough, they'll become irreplaceable. But here's the paradox. The woman who tries to be irreplaceable never is, because the moment you try to prove your worth, you've already given away your leverage. But the woman who makes him prove himself, she rewrites the entire script. You want to know the coldest truth? Sometimes a man has to lose access to you before he can feel anything real, because so many men confuse availability with low value, and so many women confuse silence with punishment. But silence isn't about hurting him. It's about healing you. It's about reclaiming the energy you gave away trying to be chosen by someone who didn't even know what he wanted. And when he finally senses that shift, that deep sacred shift where you're no longer auditioning, that's when he starts to unravel. Here's what he never tells his friends. He saw you smile at someone else, and it cut him. He watched you laugh in a photo he wasn't tagged in, and it stung. He heard you stopped asking mutuals about him, and it bruised him, because all of that tells him one thing: you moved on quietly, and that is far more lethal than any fight or farewell text. Because you didn't need closure, you became the closure, and now he's left to chase the ghost of a woman who no longer exists in the version he took for granted. You have to understand this. When a man finally senses that your self-respect is louder than your attachment, he either rises or he runs. There's no in-between, there's no neutral zone where he just figures it out. He'll either step forward, fully, or disappear trying to find a woman who will tolerate what you never will again. But even if he does, he'll still think of you. Because once a man feels your essence, not your effort, not your gifts, not your sacrifices, but your essence, and loses it, he'll crave it forever. There's one more layer, the part no one talks about. The guilt. Yes, guilt. Not for what he did, but for not seeing you sooner. Because the more he matures, the more he reflects. And one day, in the quiet of a late night or the chaos of a messy relationship, he'll remember the way you asked questions that made him think, the way you didn't react when he expected you to, the way you walked away, not with drama, but with dignity, and it'll haunt him, because now he understands you weren't trying to be everything. You already were. He just couldn't meet you there, and that's a regret he'll never voice, but will feel in every woman who almost touches your depth, but never quite does. And that's what he senses. Not your pain, not your desire, but your elevation. Your detachment isn't cold, it's refined. Your silence isn't avoidance, it's sacred. Your absence isn't punishment, it's protection. And the second he realizes you didn't just walk away, you transcended, that's when he'll never let you go. Not in memory, not in fantasy, not in his most vulnerable, quiet, 2 a.m. moments. Because now your ghost has a grip on his growth, and he knows it. Let's talk about the moment it shifts, not the moment you block him, not the moment you cry in the shower, whispering affirmations through broken mascara. I'm talking about the moment inside you, quiet, sacred, irreversible, when you stop seeing him as the answer. That instant, when the emotional fog lifts, when the ache in your chest turns into stillness, when you look at your phone, see his name, and feel nothing, no pull, no curiosity, no flinch, because finally, your nervous system is no longer tethered to his inconsistency, and that right there, that's the moment he feels it. Even if he doesn't know why, even if he hasn't seen you in weeks, he senses the severing. Because when you detach from a place of inner peace, not pride, you collapse the power imbalance. And he's no longer in control. Freud once said that loss is the birthplace of obsession. When something or someone becomes unreachable, the unconscious starts building fantasies. And the cruel irony, the version of you he now obsesses over is the one he never got to fully know. Because while he was busy performing, distracting, testing, withdrawing, you were blooming, privately, internally, slowly, like fire behind glass. He never got to witness the evolved version of you, and that stings more than anything. Because now he realizes he didn't lose the version of you that waited, he lost the version of you that would never wait again. You want to know why he still checks your profile? Why he lurks in the shadows of your digital world? because he's trying to solve a riddle, not about you, but about himself. He's not asking, who is she now? He's asking, why wasn't I enough for her to stay? And the answer, whether he admits it or not, is brutal. Because you outgrew the cycle. Because you stopped confusing his crumbs for connection. Because you finally realized your silence was more powerful than your explanations. Here's what most women never learn. You don't win by getting him back. You win by becoming the kind of woman he can never get back to. A woman whose evolution outpaces his patterns. A woman whose growth makes her incompatible with his excuses. A woman who, instead of waiting for closure, became it. And once he senses that, once he feels the shift in your voice, the calm in your gaze, the way you laugh without flinching, it hits him like a cold wind. He's not part of your next chapter. He was just a lesson in your last one. Let me give you another story. She was 29, a nurse, kind eyes, soft voice. He came in loud, charming, charismatic, magnetic. They clicked fast. Texts all night, coffee runs, movie marathons. She gave everything, her time, her touch, her tears, until slowly he faded. He stopped asking questions. He replied late. He got busy. And one night, as she waited for a text that never came, something in her snapped, not with rage, not with sorrow, but with clarity. She got up, deleted the thread and whispered to herself, never again. She didn't block him, didn't post quotes, didn't warn him. She just exited the stage. Months later he texted her, "Hey, been thinking about you." She never replied. He still texts her once in a while, and every time he's left on read, not because she's playing games, but because he's no longer speaking to the woman he once knew. That woman no longer exists. And that, Freud would argue, is why men spiral after losing a truly self-possessed woman, because they weren't rejected by a person. They were rejected by a mirror that showed them their emotional ceiling, their limits, their inability to meet someone at depth. And when that mirror vanishes, he's left alone with himself. That's why he keeps trying to re-enter your orbit. Not because he loves you, but because he hates who he is without you. And that, darling, is not romance. That's regret. This is where you have to be ruthless with your healing, because he will try. He'll test the door. He'll flirt with nostalgia. He'll send the "Hey stranger" text. But here's the part you have to understand. The moment he senses that your value is no longer wrapped around his recognition, he'll either evolve, or he'll try to regress you. Because when a man feels your distance, his ego panics, but his soul wakes up. And if he's not ready to meet you at that new level, he'll try to pull you back to the version of yourself that's settled. Don't go. You didn't climb out of the wreckage just to revisit the ashes. Now let's talk about the relapse fantasy. Every woman has it. That imaginary scene where he shows up at your door, eyes soft, hands trembling, whispering, "You were right, I didn't see it, but I do now." It's tempting, because that fantasy isn't about him. It's about being seen, about being chosen after all the heartbreak. But here's the catch. Even if he comes back with flowers and apologies, will he really meet you at your new frequency? Or will he just try to reenact the old script? Because unless he's grown, unless he's faced the parts of himself that avoid, that ghost, that sabotage, he's not coming back to love you. He's coming back to feel safe. And your energy should not be a shelter for a man running from his own shadow. This is where the feminine flips the script. You stop waiting for his return. You stop hoping he wakes up. You stop decoding mixed signals. Instead you build, you rise, you enter rooms where your softness is matched, not manipulated, where your depth is admired, not drowned, where your peace is protected, not performed. And slowly your entire life starts to reflect the woman you became the moment you let go of the fantasy and chose the reality of your own power. Let's go even deeper. You know the real moment he can't stop thinking about. It's not the sex, not the laughs, not even the goodbye. It's the moment you stopped reacting. That dinner where he expected tears and you smiled. That message he left unread and you never brought it up. That party you walked into, radiant, untouched, unmoved. Because those moments whispered something his ego couldn't explain. She's gone, but she didn't run, she evolved. And that's the wound he'll never stop picking at. Because how do you chase someone who no longer lives at your level? You don't. You watch her rise, and you drown in the silence she left behind. There's a specific kind of silence that terrifies a man, not the angry kind, not the revenge-filled one with blocked numbers and deleted photos. I'm talking about the kind where your energy just stops reaching for him. The kind where you no longer feel the need to post something to prove you've moved on. Where you don't seek validation from his friends or attention from his enemies. You just become air, untouchable, invisible, yet everywhere. He'll hear you in lyrics he never noticed before. He'll taste you in the middle of a kiss with someone else. He'll feel you in the quiet parts of the day when his phone doesn't buzz, and he knows it's not you. That's the kind of silence that haunts, because it doesn't beg, doesn't bargain, doesn't explain. It just says, I'm no longer there. And that kind of absence, it becomes a man's prison. You want to know what makes a man finally respect a woman. It's not her cooking, not her loyalty, not how much she forgave. It's when she becomes a standard he can no longer reach. A woman who once gave him access, now living in a life that makes him feel small by comparison, not out of spite, but out of evolution. She dresses differently, speaks differently, her circles tighter, her smiles freer, and suddenly she feels like a stranger wearing the skin of a woman he once knew. That's when it hits him. He can't go back, not because she locked the door, but because he no longer holds the key. Freud's lens on love was raw, uncomfortable. He believed that much of our romantic longing is rooted in unresolved childhood wounds, and when you finally stop giving him mother energy, when you stop holding space for his brokenness, stop soothing his fears, stop feeding his validation addiction, he panics, because suddenly he's alone with the parts of himself you once bandaged, and he realizes you weren't just a woman, you were a mirror, a reflection of the man he could have become, if only he had done the work. But now that mirror's shattered, and the image staring back at him is his own stunted self. No more blame, no more distractions, just him, his decisions, and the echo of the woman who walked away without turning back. And here's the sick twist, he might even try to replace you with someone easier, someone who doesn't ask real questions, someone who doesn't challenge his rhythm, someone who lets him lead without ever asking where they're going. But it won't last. Because after being touched by your depth, surface level becomes nauseating. He'll smile, he'll post, he'll pretend, but underneath it all is a man gasping for air in a room filled with noise but no resonance, and eventually he'll have to admit, she's not you, she never was. That's when the real grief starts, not when you leave, but when he realizes you're never coming back. Because you didn't just stop calling, you stopped hoping, you stopped imagining a future with him, you stopped defending him in your mind, stopped rewriting history to feel better, stopped romanticizing the chaos. You closed the tab and opened your life. And while he's stuck watching reruns, you're busy writing sequels. There's something brutal about healing. It doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it feels quiet, lonely, still. There are mornings where your chest still tightens when you hear a song, nights where you wonder if he ever really knew you. But then slowly, the ache fades, the noise quiets, and one day, you wake up and don't think of him first. That's the revolution, not the loud exit, but the soft return to self. That's what he senses, that's what makes him spiral. Because he knows now, you're not avoiding him, you've outgrown him. And once a man feels that, there's no coming back. Let's pull back the curtain even further. You know what he missed. It wasn't just your warmth, it was your belongingness. That sacred feminine energy that made him feel safe just by being around you. You remembered his mother's birthday. You picked up on his moods before he did. You touched him in a way that made him exhale, like he could finally breathe. And he mistook that gift for something he could pick off a shelf again. He can't, because what you gave came from a place most women don't access. And once you withdraw it, once he senses the spiritual tether is gone, he doesn't lose a partner, he loses home. And here's the part that stings him the most. You were willing to stay, willing to hold space, willing to walk through fire with him until you weren't, until his pattern started to suffocate your potential, until his silence started to echo louder than your love, until one day your soul whispered, "This isn't growth anymore, this is survival." And you listened, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence for yourself. You didn't need revenge. You didn't need to make him jealous. You didn't need a replacement. You just needed peace. And when peace became more valuable than potential, you changed the game. You became the woman who doesn't chase closure. You became the woman who doesn't compete. You became the woman who, once she's done, stays done. And that kind of woman, she gets carved into a man's memory, not as a conquest, but as a consequence. There's a final thing Freud would have pointed out. When a man is faced with the absence of a woman who truly loved him, he starts to regress. He tries to recreate the dynamic with someone else. But it's a performance, because the imprint you left isn't just emotional, it's psychological. He may not know why he can't let go, but you do. You know what you gave, you know what you became, you know what he lost. And the best part, you didn't lose yourself in the process. You found her. The version of you that doesn't bend anymore, that doesn't explain, that doesn't wait, because now you are the closure, and he'll never stop sensing it. You're not just a memory to him now, you're a benchmark, a reference point, a comparison he'll use, even if he swears he won't. She could be beautiful, nicer, less complex, more agreeable, but if she doesn't carry that energy you held, quiet certainty, magnetic restraint, a gaze that didn't beg, he'll feel it, that absence, that void, that haunting sense that the woman beside him doesn't ignite what you did, not because you were better, but because you were different. You weren't trying to be chosen, you were choosing. And once a man gets a taste of a woman who chooses herself first, nothing else quite compares. He might resent it, because that kind of woman, you force his evolution. You don't comfort his ego, you call it out. You don't submit to chaos, you mirror it back, until he can't look away. You didn't fight him, you held up a mirror, and let his reflection do the rest. And the most dangerous thing you ever did was stop proving yourself. You let go, with grace, with silence, with finality. And now he has to carry the truth. She didn't need me, she wanted me, and I wasted it. You were never too much, he was just too small to hold what you carried. That's the part he won't admit, but always feel. When your name comes up, when he hears a song, when he sees your photo unexpectedly, mid-scroll, and the breath in his chest catches before his thoughts can filter it. because you weren't a chapter, you were the turning point, the moment in his life where he had to decide, do I rise to meet her, or do I retreat into comfort? And now, years later, if he's honest, he knows he retreated, and that's the regret he'll never outgrow. But this isn't about him anymore, it never really was. This is about what happens after the silence, after the ache, after you've cried on the floor and whispered, no more. You begin again, not with rage, not with fear, not with some checklist of masculine traits to avoid. You begin with power, not loud, not performative, but the kind that walks into a room and doesn't need to be noticed to own it, the kind that doesn't chase because it attracts, the kind that doesn't tolerate because it selects. You become her, the version of you that once seemed out of reach, the version he always sensed but never earned. You don't send the angry text, you don't stalk his new girl, you don't craft clever captions meant to make him curious. You just live, fully, richly, deeply, and in doing so you take back every piece of power you once handed out like candy, hoping someone would finally taste your worth. But now, you taste it yourself, and it's intoxicating, and he knows it. There's a final brutal truth. The reason he'll never let you go, not really, is because you awakened something he didn't know existed. Not love, not lust, but awareness. Awareness of the kind of woman who doesn't orbit his life, but pulls it into alignment. Awareness of what it feels like to be seen without performance, touched without earning it, respected without manipulation. And the tragedy, he wasn't ready, but you were. And now he'll spend the rest of his relationships wondering why they all feel less. You don't have to haunt him, life already will. Because when he finds himself with someone who doesn't challenge him, who doesn't make him rise, who lets him coast, he'll think of you, not because you were perfect, but because you were real, because your eyes didn't just look at him, they read him, because your silence wasn't empty, it was echo, and because even now, long after the text stopped, after the calls went unanswered, after the nights turned into years, he still checks, not your messages, your shadow. Because if he senses you in the room, if he catches even a flicker of your energy in someone else, he'll stop, breathe, and ache, not for what was, but for what he never got to become with you. So let this be your reminder. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to beg, perform, chase, or explain. You just have to return, again and again, to the version of you that existed before the world asked you to shrink. The woman who is whole without applause. The woman who doesn't need to be needed to feel valuable. The woman who knows that real connection doesn't come from effort, it comes from alignment. That's the woman he can't forget. That's the woman he senses, long after you've gone. And that's the woman who, once she leaves, leaves forever. Because here's the mic drop truth. He doesn't remember the woman who loved him the most. He remembers the one who loved herself more. And that's the energy he'll chase in every woman who isn't you, and never find. So now you know, he doesn't fall in love with your kindness. He doesn't commit because you were the easiest. He stays haunted, humbled, and hooked because you became a standard, a mirror, a force. And when you finally stopped chasing him, he started chasing a version of you he'll never hold again. Not because you vanished, but because you evolved. And that kind of transformation, it doesn't beg for attention, it becomes the attention.